The Biden administration issued a wide range of sanctions against Russia last week in retaliation for meddling in U.S. elections and cyber espionage campaigns. The U.S. has formally accused Russia of hacking software made by a Texas-based company called SolarWinds. The cyber attack was discovered last December. An NPR report takes a look at the SolarWinds hack and examines how Russian hackers unleashed a virus that spread to thousands of government and private computer networks. Dina Temple-Raston is the author of that article and joins me now. Dina is a correspondent for NPR's investigations team focusing on national security, technology, and social justice. Dina, thanks for being here. This was a sophisticated attack, but it actually involved a routine software update. The experts you spoke with called the breach phenomenal and innovative. What was it about the code and the way that the hackers implanted it that made this attack so effective?
Well, it was a very multi-leveled attack. So they attacked one company, SolarWinds, and what they were trying to do is get into its customer base. So they had about 18,000 of their customers that downloaded this update. Then they and anybody who deployed it and then actually was connected to the internet as well would allow the hackers to come in and communicate with their servers. And there were all kinds of things that this hack particularly did. You know, like because they had so many targets, they had actually written a little piece of code that would basically ping out to these targets and tell them who was the target on the other end, not just an IP address, but who was on the other end. And because SolarWinds made a network monitoring software, it was kind of genius to hack it because by its very nature, network monitoring software touches anything or everything in a network, and it looks perfectly natural to be sort of roaming around.
Dina, were there any missed signs or early warnings that this was happening? And then how was this intrusion eventually spotted, and how did they determine who was responsible for the attack?
Well, we know that there were at least 3 companies that saw something strange. 2 of them couldn't trace it back to the SolarWinds update, but one, a company called FireEye, was able to trace it back. And the way they found out was an unusual way in that their security team happened to see that there was a particular employee who appeared to have registered 2 telephones on their network. And that wasn't usual. So they first sent the employee an email. The employee didn't respond. So then they called the employee, and the employee said, "No, I don't have 2 phones." And what that told FireEye was that there was somebody who was roaming around their networks looking like an employee who wasn't supposed to be there. So they tore apart their servers, and they basically isolated it down to the SolarWinds software update. And then they called SolarWinds. So that's how we found out.
It's so interesting because SolarWinds wasn't really a company that people were familiar with, I think, before December of last year. And now there are concerns that this SolarWinds breach could actually open back doors for similar cyber attacks in the future. Why was this company targeted, and why was it so effective?
Well, again, it's partly because it was network monitoring software, so it got to touch everything. But SolarWinds is actually a rather ubiquitous company if you are a backroom technician. IT people know it, but because we don't watch our networks, right? We just make sure we're on the other side of the screen. It isn't something that we will have seen. And so in a way, it was kind of genius to hack them because it was something that only an IT backroom would see. In terms of backdoors, nobody's quite sure, right? They had 9 months to be roaming through, we know, at least 100 Fortune 500 companies and at least almost a dozen government agencies. And they had all that time to look around. And what we do know so far is that mostly what they seem to be doing was looking at emails and reading emails. And if you think about it, there's a lot of intelligence information to get out of an email. And what we don't know is whether or not during this 9 months, they were able to put in ingenious little hacks or backdoors that will allow them in later. That's what everybody's worried about, that this is the beginning of something much bigger than just the SolarWinds hack.
And that's what we hear from experts over and over again, that they aren't sure that all of the tentacles have, in fact, been rooted out. So Dina, ultimately, what can either the U.S. government do or private industries do to try and prevent these type of attacks and to also safeguard against any of these backdoors being opened?
Well, it's hard to say. The way you safeguard against a backdoor being opened is you take a look in your servers and look for something there, right? But I think they're trying to puzzle out how the U.S. government is going to respond. The past two administrations, both the Trump administration and the Obama administration, have sort of given a bit of a hands-off response to some of these big nation state hacks. And I think the Biden administration is making really clear that they're going to do something different. And we've already seen the sanctions, as you mentioned earlier, but I think we're also going to see another executive order that's going to start looking at things like how we develop software in the United States and how we can safeguard that, to like air gap it. I mean, they got into SolarWinds because they got into their build environment where they built software. They didn't get the source code. They actually snuck into where the software was made. So if that's air gapped, then it makes it harder to do something like that. So I think what we'll see in the next couple of weeks are some very specific suggestions on how the government can first change how federal agencies do things and then perhaps inspire companies who want federal work to do the same.
All right, Dina Temple-Raston, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.